Hello and welcome to this episode number 4 of our tutorial series about extending Pano2VR. In this episode I want to cover the combination of Pano2VR with two very popular web technologies. First of all, I mentioned it in tutorials before, is jQuery for manipulation and bringing in interaction and so on. And the second one, which is the main topic of this tutorial, is to integrate the very popular layout framework and interactivity framework called Bootstrap. I have prepared an example we want to work on during this tutorial. And let's have a short look at it, what it is happening here, and I'm explaining the different parts of what we are seeing here. We have a small interactive tour with 4 nodes. You can walk around in an old monastery in Austria, and they have some very nice halls. And let's walk from the entrance hall to the so-called stone hall, and where you can have concerts, and another one is a kind of a conference room. And there we have a small room for seminars or something like that, which is covered with Chinese style wall paintings. And we have some other extras here in the rooms we want to cover with our extension of Pano2VR. This extension is providing this lower part of our panorama tour, the gray area here. You can fade it down and fade it up. We are working with the Pano2VR margins here, so the panorama isn't hidden or covered by the menu. It's always using the whole part of the screen, and the screen is reduced to swipe up this part in the lower area of the screen. This part is a tabbed content, and if you walk around in the tour, you see it's changing the text and it's changing the buttons. And if you want, here, this is a Hall of Homage, and you have some text here with some links. And this interaction is working in 2 directions. You can walk around in the tour, and these small menu strips here, this tab-like content navigation is following it and switches when we change the room. And on the other hand, if you click on this button, you can change the room as well. It works like a menu in the panorama tour, and it follows this one. And of course, you have here the text changing. In some text you see some yellowish links, and these links are not web links. They are focusing the user on a certain part of the panorama. If you click here, it turns the view to put focus on this screen on the wall, or if you go to this room and click on this link with the piano, you focus on the piano. And in the hall we started the panorama, you can go here, and here is some link. It turns the view up to this wonderful painting on the ceiling of this hall. And all this interaction is built up with jQuery. This is a JavaScript library for very convenient manipulation of HTML content, adding interaction, loading stuff, and so on. It's already a bit covered in the tutorial number 3 before, and we will use it for some stuff here, but the main part is the layout, the formatting, and the interaction introduced in this lower part here, and this is done with Bootstrap. And Bootstrap will be the main focus during this tutorial. After having inspected the finished project showed online here, now let's have a look at what I have done so far in Pano2VR before I added all this interesting stuff. So let's have a look at the starting point and switch over to Pano2VR and open the project here. I named it _work, and we are making our steps based on this starting project here. The project itself is pretty straightforward, only some node links between the rooms, and we have some description and some user titles. Nothing very special. Everything is pretty straightforward and no extraordinary stuff in here. In the skin, let's have a look here. Also, we don't have very special stuff. We have a header with header title and header description where we read out the user data, and we have controller. It's based on the version 6 simplex skin. I modified it a bit and rearranged the buttons and so on. Nothing really fancy here. And the only stuff I added here is this box, and let's have a closer look to it, what it is doing. And this is called textbox, and what's important for later work, it has a CSS class named textbox. This is very important as we need to address this textbox later and to exchange its content depending on the interactivity I attach to all these areas. So this tabs content loading is kind of a dummy text. It's not as interesting very much, and the only thing I've done here beside this is this button, and the button has an up for sliding this area up, or to hide it, to slide it down below the lower edge of the screen. This button has a background and so on, and these buttons are controlling the single variable I added here. It is called with tabs, and it changes the margin of the panorama window. So we start with a bottom margin of 200 pixels, and this variable is changing it to 200 pixels, or if I slide it down, it changes it to 0, and set the with tabs false to switch these both buttons. Nothing very special here. You see the visibility of the buttons. They are switched on off depending on this area to be shown or not. I marked it as these areas are added to this pretty normal skin, and so this is a short walk around in the skin and in the project file, what we have so far and what is our starting point. If we have a short look back to our finished project, we can easily see what do we want to achieve in this tutorial episode. So we have some links of interaction between the parts of the panorama. So we need these buttons. They are changing the content in the lower part of this section. We have the panorama, which is controlling the activity of these buttons, marking them active. We have vice versa, the connection from these buttons to the panorama. If I click here, I need to change the node. And if I click on a node hotspot, I need to change the tab button here. And it also changes the text. And the third interaction path we have here to be added is to see certain parts of the panorama if we click on a yellow marked link here. So this is not an ordinary web link. It is attached. There's an action attached to it controlling the view of the panorama. And all this can be done more or less within the skin editor, but things get complicated then for sure. And so we have another way which is very much extensible to more complicated constructions to combine textual content with panoramas and to make really instructive virtual tour projects where you can tell a lot about the panoramas, the rooms you are walking through, or the locations you are covering with your node structure. And also we can have the possibility with this to extend informations about the room, about certain views like paintings or some other stuff. Or let's think another use case, you have an online store and you are turning around, or your visitors are turning around in a shop, and you have some products to buy positioned around, and if you have a product list here, then you can make a two-way interaction. If you click on a product here, you get a description here on the sidebar, or if you have a product list here, then you switch in the room to look at this product in the room. And especially very nice if you have some relation of size or something like that, where you can make your visitors better imagine what size the product has, and so on and so on. The possibilities are endless for these use cases, and the connection between a virtual tour and information or informational content can be managed way easier if you connect other technologies with Pano2VR using its JavaScript API. Before I go deeper into details, let's have a few thoughts together about JavaScript libraries or CSS libraries and frameworks, and think about why they are so useful. Especially jQuery as an extremely popular and widespread used library. It's useful for manipulating the document object model. Let's have a short look on this homepage of jQuery. Here we have what's called a brief look. We have some very handy expressions in this line. This little line of code exchanges the text, the labeling of an element of a button, and puts new text in it. If you want to write this in plain JavaScript, you need a few lines for it, and first you need to find this element with this class and then change its content this way, and so it's only a short expression. To do this, you can attach so-called handlers to events, and these events can be attached to arbitrary elements. Usually you have clickable elements in HTML only with form elements like checkboxes, buttons, and so on. And with web links like this is a link element. It has a click event by default. And here you can add a click with jQuery, and with JavaScript of course too, but jQuery is a shorthand method for this. You can add events to arbitrary elements and so on. And you can use jQuery, and this is one of the most used use cases, is you can use jQuery to load information into your current web page at arbitrary parts from arbitrary sources. Here it's an external source, and if this loading is successful, it puts some HTML into a div with this ID. We used it already. If we go back to our examples from tutorial number 3, here we use jQuery loading from external sources. We have HTML pages here providing the content for this box, and if I change the node, a new AJAX call, a jQuery load command is fired and reading in the HTML and putting it into here. This is a replacement for the user data title, user data description, and this text remains externally editable. So it is an extension of Pano2VR using jQuery for loading elements. This is one reason why jQuery is extremely popular and very useful. It saves a lot of writing code and makes things clearer and shorter and more concise. When we now have a closer look to this lower section with the tabs, the buttons here, switching the text and the notes, and let's focus on the interactivity inside of this area. Then we have 4 buttons, and these buttons are exchanging the content of the area below. This is made with Bootstrap. And what is Bootstrap? Bootstrap is an CSS framework. It's combined with JavaScript for some interaction stuff, but it's mainly a CSS framework. And the main target is to simplify layout work and to minimize CSS coding. Bootstrap originally was invented by the Twitter guys in the beginning of this messenger service. And let's have a look what Bootstrap is. Bootstrap is, for a long time now, it's an open source project. It has nothing to do anymore with Twitter and its successor X. And it is just a framework with a very intelligent combination of CSS classes and CSS rules. And you only need to integrate a CSS file and a JavaScript file at the beginning of your web page. Here's the CSS file and here is the script file, and then you can do really nice stuff. In the beginning of Bootstrap, as it was invented by the Twitter guys, the Twitter developers, the upcoming smartphones made it necessary to think about responsiveness, and it is a time when this rule mobile first was invented, and we have some examples for it. I don't want to go too much in detail here, as Bootstrap is extremely powerful and it is way too much to explain everything here, but let's have a short look what Bootstrap is used for. You have components which are more or less ready-made, and they have a set of CSS classes and rules which allows you to use pre-formatted parts of your website, which ready-made colors and typography and so on. You see here you can build headers, you can hero images or hero content on top of your page, you can reformat listings, you have modals, pop-up dialogues, you can create your footers for sticky content at the bottom of your web page, you can customize the drop-downs of forms, and you can use badges, warnings, you can use a breadcrumb menu, and all the components for these purposes are more or less ready-made, and you have a set of colors. You can change it generally, and all your parts, your related parts on your website will follow these colors. And all this stuff can be more or less be done without writing any line of CSS code, even when it's based more or less on CSS. And it's combined with JavaScript, and one of these use cases we have here for our project is the part of the navigation tabs. Here you have in the documentation, which is very fine and very good structured, you have here components, and you see these elements I showed before here, the button groups, and you have one component group, it's navigations and tabs. And this is starting with normal menus, and you can use for navigating your website and so on and so on. And we have some example here I based my project on, is to use such a menu combined with a content area. Let's check it, it should be here, and you have a text box, and you can switch its content by clicking on these tabs. This content is already loaded, it is only made visible or invisible depending on the tab you click on here. I modified this a little bit, and this part is related to the lower part of our project, and I took a little bit from it and modified it a bit to make it clear what's happening here. And this is the base of our project and one example for what Bootstrap components can do. And another part of Bootstrap is the responsiveness and the layout structure. So you can use a grid system with columns, and these columns can be modified with modifying the screen size. And you see, of course, the Bootstrap site itself is based on Bootstrap. So if you decrease the screen size, then you see that the elements are changing its place. So the menu from the sidebar is going to here, and the other examples here are moving to their respective places. And this is only done by screen size sensitive HTML classes. And here you see the so-called breakpoint table. From what screen size on, you have only a 2-letter code for small, mid, large, X large and XX large, representing certain numbers, and you simply add it to make this a property. So here's the column number. You can have, dependent on your screen size, 6 colors, or if it gets smaller, 4 columns, or if it gets even more smaller, only 3 or only 1 column when the screen is very small, like on a smartphone. And this is extremely nice, and you see in this example here how it is working. And here you see this is automatic width, and if the screen gets smaller than larger, you get only 2 columns, and so on and so on. And you don't need to write any code for it, just add these columns and the page will behave related to this if you decrease or increase the screen size. This is a very important feature of Bootstrap. Besides all these interactive and layout purposes, Bootstrap is invented for. In this section of our tutorial, I want to set up the project structure with all files we need so we can start to work on it. And I have the start project here. Nothing is generated. Let's hit the cogwheel button to generate the output. And you see the usual procedure here. The panoramas are pretty small, so it runs fast here on this machine. I'm hitting the preview in the browser button, and everything behaves as expected. And now we want to have a look at the files we have in here. And I'm switching to Visual Studio Code. It's empty now, and I'm throwing in my project folder. Just let it drop in the sidebar, and you have the Pano2VR file. It is, by the way, it's an XML file and readable. And we have the skin file. It's not readable. In fact, the skin file is a zip file with another file extension, but we don't care about this now. We have our panorama folder with our 4 panorama images, and we have an output folder. I named it output work here to separate from eventual other output folders. Usually I rename it to my liking. And we have the content, we have the images, we have the type folder, we have the skin, the panorama player, the index.html, and the XML file describing the tour itself. And that's our starting point. So I folded to collapse them all. And now let's add one folder. Usually I name it to extras, because everything what's in here will be exported together with all stuff into the output work folder. And to initiate this, I'm heading over to Pano2VR, go to the output panel, scroll way down to the end, and in the section advanced at the very end you have a little plus sign in the section assets, file and folders, and I add a folder, and the folder will be extras. So everything what we throw into this extras folder will be exported as well and is available in the finalized project. If we now hit the cogwheel button, nothing will happen as there are no files in there. So you won't see it, as Pano2VR checks whether folders are having content or not. If they haven't, they won't be exported. So the first thing, I talked about it already, we want to have is jQuery as our Swiss knife for everything. And I just go to jQuery starting page and hit the download button, and then I'm heading over to the download page, and it's pretty simple. If you hover with the mouse over this button here, you see in the bottom the URL display. It is already the file we need, so save link as, and we go to this extra folder, and it's pretty right away here. And now this extras folder has its first file, and let's check it. Extras jQuery with a version number and so on, and it's a compressed file. It's no readable JavaScript code. It is just scrambled and packed, so it's minimized as the file name tells us. And if we now go to Pano2VR and hit the generate button and now have a look at the file structure we have now, you go to output work. Now you find an assets folder corresponding to this section of the output panel, and we have inside of this assets folder is a folder extras, and inside of the extras folder is a copied jQuery file. So it lives in our output and is available now. That's the first step we have to do. So we have added an extras folder for additional files we need for our project and managed it to export it with the whole project to the final output folder. Now let's do the same with the Bootstrap files we need. The procedure is pretty much the same, but we need to sort out some files from a downloaded zip. So let's head over to the browser, and I'm going to Bootstrap download, and we take just the first download button, and you see in the bottom of the browser window we have a Bootstrap 5.3.5 dist zip. This is a distribution folder of GitHub, and GitHub is a code repository where you can download open source files, as Bootstrap is one. And just save link as, and I'm throwing it into my extras folder. And now I'm fetching this folder and clean it a little bit up. So we have our extras folder, jQuery we use already, and this zip file needs to be unpacked, open, and you see now a folder with two subfolders, CSS and JS, and there are a little bit stuff to select from. And what we need is the general Bootstrap CSS file, as Bootstrap is a CSS framework with some JavaScript added. And so we look out for a file bootstrap min.css, and this one I move it over to my extras folder. I need it here. And now let's head over to the JavaScript folder, and there you have the corresponding file with everything in it what we need. It is a bootstrap bundle min.js. A bundle means that there are some other files for some subfunctions of Bootstrap are included here. Maybe we need them, maybe not, but it's better to have them at hand if we need it. And now we move this Bootstrap bundle min into here, and we can safely delete this folder and the corresponding zip file. And as we have added it into the extras folder, it will be automatically exported. So when we hit the generate button and head over to VS Code, we have the both Bootstrap files now included in our export. And that's pretty much what we want. So we can close it here. And now we are ready to go with all files we need as prefabricated helpers. What we need now is our own files where we write the code we need to achieve the goals we had for our tutorials, to let this tabbed content folder at the bottom get to live. So 2 files are needed for this, and the one file is custom.js for this JavaScript we need to write, and the next one is new file, and you guess it, custom.css. And these are the 2 files we really write, and the others are prefabricated, but the custom CSS relies on Bootstrap min CSS, and custom.js relies as well on jQuery and on the Bootstrap bundle file. So now we are set for integrating these files into our project. So when we head over to Pano2VR and generate the output again, the new files will be integrated into the output. And if we head over to the file structure, we have the extras folder, and let's have a look into the output folder. In the assets folder and extras, you see our 5 files we have set up in the file structure of our extras folder. They are now properly exported with the output and available for further work. They only added to the output, but they won't be loaded. If we refresh our output and hit the F12 key to see our developer tools here, and we hit the output again, I filtered it for CSS, JS and HTML files. You see our new files are missing. So that's what we need to fix now, and to integrate them into the output as they, not only as they are copied to the output, but also read in by the index HTML, and so they are really functional, usable for us. So that's a job for the skin editor. And we head over to Pano2VR, and I save it, by the way. And now I'm heading to our skin, and now we need a new element. I'm hitting the rightmost button in the elements bar. Under advanced, we have a code element, and just click anywhere. It is invisible, so the position doesn't matter. I'm usually make it so large that I can see the icons, that I know, okay, what is this element? And I'm usually naming it by its content, about the content, to make it a little bit descriptive. Usually I'm started with an underscore, but you can do it as you like. Bootstrap 5, jQuery 3. I'm writing here some hints to the versions and some CSS, JS custom. So I have a talking name for it. And now we need to go to the code element panel. Can fold on, collapse the position. And what we need now is the external files section. You can have it also in the general properties under external files. Then the files are mainly attached to the skin. I prefer it to have it attached to a separate element. That is a big advantage. I can make this element to a component, and there are some ways to integrate these external files readily usable into this component by using the local file section. We won't do that now, but we need to fill in the external files section to have these files available for us, so the skin can communicate with it, or the index HTML, and we really can add our functions we need. So I'm hitting the plus button, and I'm starting with the Bootstrap file. And now I need to change to the Visual Studio Code so I can copy my files. And you can do it as we have already outputted, exported them. You can really do it by Bootstrap -css. I take this as a first file and just copy relative path and then edit it here. And you need to do now is to think about where is this file wanted. And if we take the perspective of the output, then our output is happening inside of the output work folder. The index file is here, and then we have the first subfolder is asset, the second subfolder is extras, and there we have the files we need. So you just need to delete output work and the first slash, and you are set. Now we have the right path so that the skin is finding this file. And just repeat it at next. Usually I'm starting with the CSS files first. It is kind of a good style. And copy a relative path. And you can, instead of clicking the plus button, you can make a double click on it. Output work. Double click to mark it. And now we start with the JavaScript file. First of all, we need jQuery. Copy a relative path. And you switch to JavaScript and paste it in here. Remove output work to have the asset folder marked. And the next one is Bootstrap bundle. Copy a relative path. Double click, JavaScript, paste, output work, removed. And the last one, as a third JavaScript file here, we do something cool instead. We have the code window. You can write your JavaScript code in here, but you can also use an external file. Just click on the From File checkbox, activate it. So you see now the folder symbol is activated, and now go to Project, Extras, Custom CSS and integrate it here. So now this JavaScript file we want to work in is connected with the skin. And if you open the edit folder, you cannot write anything here, because it is locked and you can edit this externally, but this file is watched. And if you go to view and let live update on save only unchecked, then everything you change in the skin will immediately invoke a reload in the browser. That is very handy, so we can have an auto reload in the browser when we edit this file externally. That's a really great feature. So otherwise, you can edit here, of course, in the same way we did it with the other 4 files, but then you always need to save the external file, head over to Pano2VR, regenerate the output, or hit at least save, and then head over to the browser. So you can leave Pano2VR in the background and only have the code editor in the browser, and everything is reloaded and updated in the background. It's a great feature of Pano2VR 7. So now we are ready to start working. After having everything prepared here, let's now check everything is working as desired. And I'm hitting save in my skin editor and head over to the browser, and I'm hitting F12. And let's have a look with a reload whether our files are integrated. And you see something changed here. Now we have our Bootstrap file loaded. We have our custom CSS loaded, our jQuery file, our Bootstrap JavaScript file, but the custom.js isn't loaded. Why it is? It is integrated into the skin. Skin.js is already a JavaScript file, so it's easy to integrate my own written JavaScript into the skin editor. That's why this file is missing, but its content is integrated into skin.js. We can verify this by adding some code here into our custom.js file, and heading over to our code editor, just be sure you have two versions of the files. These are the exported ones, which are living inside of the output folder. It's safe to close this output folder or collapse it, so you be sure that you edit this file. And let's add console.log as an output for our developers tools log. This is from custom.js, and we should see it. Just save it, and you see it moved over to the code window in the skin editor, and you may have noticed that the browser in the background has loaded. And if we now change to the console, this is from custom.js. So it's great, it's working, and we have this code really integrated. And if you open the skin.js in the browser, then you will see this code line. So now we have everything prepared and everything is working. And let's do one first tweaking step I always put in front of all work, just for tidying up everything. You have some CSS added already in the skin. In the general properties, if you click outside of the stage of the skin editor, then you get the general properties, and you see under skin settings you have embedded style sheet, and there usually is a little bit of code. I'm usually cut it here, so this is empty, and I don't have CSS code distributed over the whole project. I always want to keep it at one place where I have everything under control. And now I'm heading over to custom CSS and just pasting it in. And I'm adding a little comment here. This is a comment sign for CSS and native skin CSS. So everything what is below this line is my own stuff. I save it. Now you have no reload because the CSS files are not integrated into this auto-save and auto-reload mechanism. Here there is a possibility you can create another code element, but CSS code needs to be wrapped in some JavaScript construction, and if you add it in an external file editor, it isn't recognized as CSS anymore. So it's a better way is to use the custom CSS really as a CSS file here, and head over to the skin editor and hit save. And now this CSS code is integrated here inside of our project. And after adding this built-in CSS code from the skin and moving it here to this external CSS file to tidy things up, we now can prove that it is working. And I'm saving the skin and I'm re-exporting everything, and I'm heading over to the browser and just inspect one element here. Let's say this user data title, inspect it. And now if I'm now taking an element where the GG skin main class we have in our CSS file here, .gg skin, this is a general typography of the whole skin. And if I go to this element and I'm stepping up one further, you see now the GG skin class is defined by custom CSS, by my own CSS file now, and not from the skin editor itself. So it's very nice to have all this stuff in one place. Now let's have a closer look at our box where all the magic should happen later. We want to integrate here it is just an empty text box, and if we go to the skin editor, we have this text box, and this is called tab container, and the text box has a CSS class attached named tab box. This is very important because this is kind of our target address where we later change this content. Currently in the text section of this panel, the text tabs content loading is filled in as kind of dummy content, and this is the only thing we need to prepare in the skin editor. Everything else is made by communication between the skin and our own JavaScript to fill in the content, to load from an external file, to throw it in here, and to add all the interactivity we have between the tabs and the content and the communication between the panorama and this tabbed box here. So this is the prerequisite we need in the skin, nothing else. The button tab open close is a skin only thing. We don't need to care about it when we're setting up our programming JavaScript here. And with setting our JavaScript here, that has nothing to do with this button. When we now want to create the content loaded here, the real code structure with our tabbed content, we need to head over to Bootstrap and to have a look how it's made. We have our downloads page here. Let's move on to the nav and tabs section. What we have here is a so-called component. Bootstrap is made for layout purposes, and you can add forms and you can manipulate the content with typography, tables, and so on. And you have so-called components, which are code blocks and code sections and snippets where you can fulfill certain purposes, whatever you want. And the nav and tab section, let's take here the first place here, home. It's this section here. It's under JavaScript behavior, and it is a hint that we have some JavaScript working in the background together with this CSS. We will have a closer look later on it. And this is pretty much the structure I want to have. I have some tabs I can click on, and they are changing the content of the div below. And this section is consisting of two parts. The first part is an undotted list, and the list elements are formatted by Bootstrap in a tab style here, not as a dotted list. And we have some UL elements, and inside some LI elements and so on. And inside of these LI elements you have a button doing the interactive stuff. Below we have the tab content. It is a div with 3 divs inside, and they are called tab pane. And all this formatting and all the interactivity is done by special classes. Nav tabs is the wrapper around these 3 points. Nav item are the single items of this tab, and inside you can do what you want. Usually it's a button, and the interactivity is coming from nav link. The JavaScript functions switching around here are connected to this CSS class, and that's a secret of this Bootstrap stuff, that a lot of interactivity is not really programmed by the user, but it is only invoked by using certain CSS classes, and the interactivity is hooked to these CSS classes. And the same is for the divs below. You have tab content as a wrapper, and inside the tab content you find tab panes. And these elements are connected together. So if I click on nav item, I have a link, and this is an ID, and this home tab you will find later here, and they make use of these data attributes. I will come back to this later. And this is pretty much the blueprint of what we need here. And I've copied something of this stuff and cleaned it a little bit up, because there are some elements here we don't need, and to keep it a little bit tidy we have some modifications for having it done here. Now I will assemble the footer content here by using some of these code examples prepared from or provided from Bootstrap on the documentation pages. To speed up the demonstration of building up this content, I'm using part of this the code provided here on the Bootstrap page as an example, with some prefabricated code snippets to make it a little bit better understandable, and I walk through it step by step. First of all, I need an external HTML file. It's a little bit the same as I did in the tutorial number 3, where we have an external HTML file loaded by jQuery for every node to provide user information on the skin. So let's put this away and head over to the code editor, and I'm adding a new file, and this file will be an HTML file. It's called footer content.html, and now we have an empty file, and we have in Visual Studio Code and in other code editors usually as well some short codes. So if you start typing HTML and you see the code Embed abbreviation, and Embed is a technology where you can start typing and then you get suggestions, and if I hit the cursor down, this Embed abbreviation produces for me a plain skeleton of an HTML file. Just hit the tab button and you get this little code snippet here with a complete but very minimal HTML file. And what I'm doing now here is include a div, and this div will get an ID. I need it as I'm not reading the whole HTML file later, but only the content of it. And it's a nice trick. And now we use this Embed as well. I want to have a div with an ID, and the ID is tab box. I name it the same as it is in the skin, and now hit the tab button and you get this ID, and inside of this div I start writing my code. So as this is already in the extras folder, it will be exported into the output and can be made available for the JavaScript to be read in when the user is looking at it in the browser. So let's save it, and you see it, if you save, there's some rearranging here, and now we have our outer skeleton where we can put in the code we need. And if I now go to the nav tab section and I go to our JavaScript behavior, this is this part here, and now we can go a little bit down to a section named data attribute. It's pretty much the same, but here are some additions made which makes it a little bit clearer where we want to have our stuff. And I just take this part and copy it and throw it into my content here. Now I'm going to view word wrap to see everything here on the screen. And you see one list element, there is a lot of stuff added here, row representation, area controls, area selected. These are for accessibility rules, and for us it makes it a little bit difficult to read. So I'm replacing it by a cleaned up version I prepared for it, and where already our titles are in, and then I explain what I have done. It's a little bit more compact here, and it is the same part here. Now I'm replacing it, copy, and this is the original from Bootstrap, and if I mark that and replace it and then explain what we have inside these elements. We have some classes. You see there is an ID. It refers to our node in the tour that will be used later. And you have here some of these magic column classes. So if the screen is small with a certain screen width, the columns will be set to 6 columns. So we have 2 tabs on the side width. With 3 we have 4 tabs, and with cal12 we have only 1 tab. And this is switching automatically depending on these breakpoints. When we come to certain screen sizes, then it is degraded. Then we have 2 data arguments. These arguments these attributes, starting always with the word data, then a dash, and everything else can be freely created. And inside of the Bootstrap ecosystem, we have data dash bs for Bootstrap, and then we have some other classes, and we have a target. So this data attribute defines this link as a tab. So that is invoking some functions in the background, and this is a target. If I click on this link, then it adds as a switch to get this content in the lower part. I haven't added yet, but we will see it later. And then we have some classes for having it look at the button. The button is dark. mx is the margin on the horizontal part. So we have 2 units space on the left and the right, and the first button is active. So it gets another color and maybe some other typo. It depends on what colors are defined in Bootstrap. And so we can make one of these buttons active, and if the other button gets active, this class is removed and added here. I have already added the title of my panoramas here, and now this is the control. If I go to my browser and I have this in my local version, there it isn't, but I get to my example project, so we will see it. This formatting here with a dark background is made by the active class, and the others are the normal ones. And now we have a screen size where we have 4 buttons. So out of the 12 possible columns, 3 are occupied by each button. So it is currently this class which is active. And if I reduce the screen size, it will switch to 2 buttons, and if the screen size is very small for a smartphone, for example, then it is only 1, and this is occupying all 12 columns. So this is a basic function we have here, and we have the wrapping unordered list. It is nav tabs. It describes how it is working. That is formatted as a menu. Usually a list is a dotted list from top to down, and if the Bootstrap nav and nav tabs class is added, this list is converted to a horizontal menu-like structure. Everything of this magic is done by Bootstrap, and this means in the vertical direction we have 2 units padding, and so it's a pretty logic, and it's a dark style, and the text is centered for all elements and so on, and the text isn't wrapped if I have multi-word content as I have it here, so it won't be wrapped if the screen size gets smaller. Now I'm doing the same with the lower section, which is here marked as tab panes, and you can see it here. Always you have this area labeled by these accessibility functions or the role attribute, and I now copy my content section that is readily prepared. I'm copying it, including the comment, and we have about this copy, and I will just throw it in here. It's a little bit more simple. We have a tab content, and it is a class attached for Bootstrap to make this class to be organized in a content section where all contents are layered on top of each other, but only one is visible. And so you can connect it with a tab bar, and each of these buttons are switching to their respective div, and all others are invisible. And this is only managed by attaching this class tab-content forces its child elements to be invisible by default and only to made visible by the attached tab bar, and the child elements are initialized to do as they should by the class tab pane. And here we have some padding with 3 units. The text is white, and we always have an active, and so active is the pane which is visible, and this is just our content section below. So this is the assembly of this footer box where all the HTML structure lives in what we need to build up. And the nice thing is, as I said, everything is managed by using certain CSS classes to initialize the JavaScript background mechanics to add the interactivity between the tab bar and this tab content section below. When we have a closer look of what the Pano2VR skin is doing and what Bootstrap is doing, though both of them have mainly 3 jobs to do. The first is to take care of the layout, where Bootstrap takes care of the layout of the whole pages with text and images and layouts. And in Pano2VR, the skin editor takes care of the layout of interactivity elements like our controllers or our text box or the positions of titles and descriptions and so on. And the next job both have to do is delivering interactivity, so moving around in a panorama or attaching actions to element events. And it's the same like in our tab section. We want to build up inside of Bootstrap, where Bootstrap has its own JavaScript delivering all this interactivity. And last but not least, the third job of both is to style the interface and the elements we see in our viewport here. And we have some icons here and we have some typography here. And this typography is ruled by this CSS and other CSS the skin editor is generating. And here we see, for example, we have a font family and it's Verdana, Arial, Helvetica and so on. Some system fonts taking care of how our typography is looking like. And here's a very important job custom CSS can do along with Bootstrap. And we can use our custom fonts and to extend the possibilities of typography and so on. And the possibility of writing CSS code is much more versatile than we can do it in the skin editor, as a skin editor only can control a part of CSS parameters, while we can have control over all CSS parameters when we write our own code. Now let's start to add our own custom fonts inside of a Pano2VR project. There are several ways to do it, and I have built up kind of a best practice during the years I'm doing it, and I will walk along a certain workflow path with you to demonstrate how it's done best and safest and pretty easy. And we want to have 2 fonts in our interface, not only one, because it is often pretty nice to have 2 fonts for different purposes in a user interface. The more important parts may have some other fonts, as let's say longer text boxes or descriptive texts or so on. And the most important tool, or the best tool I've found so far, is the Google Web Font Helper. And with this Google Web Font Helper, it is kind of an interface built on the wealth of thousands of Google fonts, and you see 1,825 right now. And there we can have them for free. And with this Google Web Fonts Helper, you can prepare your font kits to build it into other projects and to integrate it and to prepare the code you need for this integration. That is pretty convenient, and this is what I want to walk along with you in this section. I have chosen 2 fonts, a Noto Serif. Here you get a sample page with all the font weights and font styles and the character sets you may have. If you may have Cyrillic if you want to have a Russian or Eastern European website, Greek, Latin, and so on. And this will be one font I want to use, and the other one is also pretty popular. It is a Roboto, and this is a Roboto condensed. For interfaces in 360 projects, I pretty often like condensed fonts. They are a bit narrow and they can contain a longer number of characters within a line, so I can keep track on the real estate of the screen I'm using for text boxes, for example. And these two fonts I want to have in my interface now should be collected and selected, and then we want to build up the code we need for the integration. Before we want to start with our font collection and our build-up, we need a folder within the extras folder. So I right-click here, new folder, and this folder is named fonts. I'm building it up front because I want to use it later when it comes to combining and constructing the CSS code for integrating these fonts into our project. So let's start with the Noto font, Noto serif. And when I select the font on the left sidebar, I have a lot of font styles. Usually I'm using the Latin character set. If I have to do with some European languages with the diacritic characters and so on, I'm using it with Latin extended. These fonts are a little bit larger, but they have German umlauts or the Czech hatchets and so on, and all these tiny little differences we have in European languages. And this is the character set, and the default is mainly International English and so on. So let's be Latin enough for it, just to have it explained. And then we have different font weights, or here it is called styles. And regular is the normal font. It's normal size. It has no special attributes like the slanted view of italic or the fat view of a bold. It is organized in a regular, and regular is represented by the number 400. And weights are reaching from 100 to 900, from very thin to very black. And in between is bold, and I would like to have the 400 weight. Is regular, so it's checked by default. And now I want to add a 700, and this is the bold font. I don't need any italics here for our project, and this selection is now feed into the next section of our Google Web Fonts helper and copy CSS. And here we have the code we need for our font integration into Pano2VR. We can choose what font files we use. The default nowadays is WOV2, and this are supported by all modern browsers. And so we don't need other fonts as a fallback. And if you want to have legacy support, you see it is adding TrueType. If you get historic support, then it's adding the old Internet Explorer, EOT, and so on, or TrueType. So let's stick with modern browsers. It's the easiest and most slim way to get away here. And then I want to have the path of the font file. It's here. And this path is here defined as fonts. And I want to have a font file here in my extras folder, and the fonts themselves are collected inside this fonts folder. So I removed this ... and so the path will only fonts from this file away I'm building soon. And now let's do this first. I select all this, copy it, and then I'm heading over to my code editor, and I go to extras, new file, and this file will get the name fonts CSS. And I usually separate it from custom CSS to keep things tidy and don't have too much code in front of what I'm really use for styling the page. This is only a resource, and we will integrate it later. And now I paste this code in here. And here you see everything what we need to integrate our Noto serif into the project. So let's have some empty lines. I save it here. And now I'm heading over to the Roboto condensed. Roboto condensed. And when I want to use the Roboto condensed, I need two styles. I also stick with the Latin only here, and I want to have a light font like a 300, and I want the 400 the regular. So I have two fonts which are pretty close together, but you can use them to fit together nicely if you want to highlight some words. And I'm adding the 700 as a really bold font for some extra highlighting words. I'm not using italics here, so I keep it, so the rule is to keep it as slim as possible, as all these checkboxes are representing one file, and this file needs to be loaded in the browser and so on. So now the same as before, I just click inside of this box. It is automatically switched to select all, and before, make sure you have the path fonts /. So now click on it, copy, and paste it here into this font CSS file. So I can save it. And now I need to fill up the files. The download files, I omitted this step in the last section. When it comes to the Noto serif, I will do it later. And now let's save this file to downloads, and I'm going back to the Noto serif and doing the same. So I have the Latin, and I have the regular, and I have the bold. So these two fonts are now collected, and if you click on the zip file, you can get it here. And now these fonts can be unpacked. So I have my downloads folder here, and I just open it and unzip it. And now you see the font files, and I'm adding it to my project. So let's move it here. This is the project folder, extras, font, and these two fonts are moving up to here. And the other three also moving up to here. So now I have everything in place. I remove these windows here, so we have our 5 font files we need for our project. And the next step is to integrate it and to make it fit for usage in our skin editor. Now let's organize everything we have downloaded and copied from the Google Web Fonts helper to integrate it into the Pano2VR skin. So first of all, there is a nice trick to do when it comes to saving some typing and to minimize errors. Usually a font family is named inside of single or double quotes, and you can change this to your liking. What the name of the font family can be freely named, and you can save some space writing later if you avoid spaces or some special characters. So if I shorten it a little bit, let's say it is Noto Ser for Noto serif as my custom font name I want to use here. You will later see it is nice if I do it this way. And for the Roboto condensed, I name it to Robocon to avoid these long words. Robocon, and doing the same here and here on every place I'm defining these fonts. So this is a pretty nice preparation. We will see later that it can be save us a lot of time. So the robo condensed and the font weight 400, this will be our default font for text. So let's change the custom CSS right away here to add a new general font for the skin editor. And let's say and you can just type it this way, robocont, and if nothing else is specified, then it will take the normal font weight, it is 400, and the normal font style, so no bold or no italic. Everything what's typed in orange here is a system fallback. These fonts are more or less installed in all machines. So let's have some soft wrap here. And the white one is a user defined. So now every text inside of our skin should use this font, but not now as we haven't integrated it. So let's take care of this integration. I'm changing to Pano2VR and go inside to the skin editor. A short remark in between. We don't need to take care about loading the fonts into this export processes automatically as it is contained in the extras folder. So you don't need to take care here about it. But in the skin, we now need to go to our code element where we have the integration of external files. And now we double click to add a new CSS file. Just copy it here and just change the file name to fonts. And now it is important to move it to a certain place and move it between Bootstrap, which brings its own font definitions on CSS styles, and before custom CSS. What we really need for our styling, this file custom CSS should be loaded at the last CSS file. So the font file needs to be in between. The loading order is from top to bottom. So before we use our custom CSS, we need to make sure that these both files are loaded, jQuery and Bootstrap. And this is automatically this custom CSS file defined here in this edit section will be loaded last as it's part of the skin CSS, and everything else will be loaded before. So, and now let's check whether it's working. And I need to output it and have a look in the browser. And you see we have now the Roboto condensed font here. We can check it, go to the inspector, and we have here the header description, and everything here is listening to the general GG skin class. And this GG skin class, as we see in our custom CSS, is defined with a robocont. And you see here the font family is listed here on custom CSS line 1, and the font which is displayed underlined here is the font which is really active in our skin. Pretty nice feature in the developer tools that it is underlined. So if you have fonts which are very, very similar, you can check here which is really loaded and which one we see here. So now we have overruled our general font family used in the skin. And we can add now some extra elements in the next step where we can use our second font. In the last step of this section of our tutorial, let's add some custom elements and to extend really what we get from the skin. And so I'm going to make a new line and say custom CSS, and you can add a comment with adding command / here. Then it is automatically wrapped into the CSS command line. and colored green. And now let's have a short look in our skin. Here we are. And I have two elements, header title on the top. And this has a CSS class attached, header-title. And the other one, header/description or desk. And we want to style these two elements with our own styles. And so you make a lot of use of these advanced CSS classes entry in the properties panel of the skin editor to style your own elements. So let's move to the editor, and I'm not just typing it, I'm fetching it from my copyboard here. And this is the usual way to check a text box and to attach your own CSS rules to it. You notice you have this .header title. This is addressing the class we have in Pano2VR. I'm just switching to the title and then getting the code editor header title here, and this corresponding to the CSS file and makes it addressable by our CSS code. So the font family is Noto Serif now, and the big advantage is if you have a one word without spaces, you don't need quotes. You can use it, but you can omit it if it's only one word, and that's very practical though. So omitting some quotes is a very popular source of errors. And another important thing to mention here is the text box is always containing two wrapped diffs. And the first div is here. Let's have a look in the developer tools, inspect the title box, and you have an outer div. This is carrying the class, and then you have an inner box. And generally with text boxes in Pano2VR, it's important to take care of the outer div, which is responsible for layouting, transforming and height and width and so on. And the inner box is responsible for styling, like whether the text is wrapped or the overflow is hidden and so on. And the inner div need to be addressed. And so we have always this construction, the outer div with its class, and then the one inner div we have here. And now let's have the Noto Serif as a font, a larger font size, and we use it here, and add a little bit text shadow. It is 1 pixel to the right, 1 pixel down, and 2 pixels soft, and it is black with an opacity of 60%. So now let's save it here, then head over to Pano2VR, save it here so it will be regenerated. And then we have everything we want to have here. And now we have this Noto Serif with a little text shadow. You see it a little bit better if you make the background bright here. And then we have it. So to complete it here, let's head over to the code editor. And now we take care of the lower part here. This is a header description. And I'm just copying my code from my cheat board here to make no typos. And we don't have a font family here, as we have generally defined Robocont as a font for everything generally inside of the skin. Only the font weight is referring to the 300. So we have kind of a semi-light font weight. Here, this is a 400 is regular, and this is a little bit lighter here, and we have the font size defined, and we have also a little text shadow. So let's save it here, head over to Pano2VR, generate it, and then go to the browser to have it reloaded here to check it. Now we have a little bit lighter font with some decent text shadows. And now we have two font families as a so-called font pairing. And I like it very much as it gives us a pretty nice design tool to separate mass text from prominent text, headers from bodies, and so on from a design perspective. And if you have several ways, so we can highlight some stuff, it is pretty nice to do it this way and to extend the possibilities of Pano2VR's skin a little bit more when it comes to typography. In this section number 4, our last section of this episode, I want to connect everything together and to build up this two-stage process we have here. The first stage is initially loading the content of this footer, and the second step is to connect all the interactivity between the panorama project and this content div below in all necessary directions. First, we have to start with JavaScript. This is our initial content of the JavaScript, and it refers to a connection which we have in our skin editor attached to the code element. And if I unfold it, you see this is the text here. Here we cannot edit it. The editing is made outside, and the skin editor is listening what's happening here. So we can leave the editor staying in the background, and it's automatically watching our file. And as we change something in the code, we will have an immediate reload of the browser. Let's add a short comment sign and now hit save here. This change is recognized by the skin editor. The skin editor saves itself, and this saving invokes automatically reload in the browser. So to monitor what this JavaScript is doing, I'm hitting the F12 key and putting it below here to the bottom to have a console where this output is showing up here. This line is coming from skin.js, is not coming from custom.js, as the content of custom.js is integrated into the skin, and the skin is outputted as skin.js. So don't be confused by seeing skin.js here. We are doing this stuff in custom.js, and this code text will be integrated in the skin itself. So what do we need first? First, we need a function to make a call from the skin to the JavaScript, and the JavaScript then should load the content. That is pretty easy in JavaScript, especially when we are using some shorthand functions from jQuery. So let's first think about what event we need to fire up such a function. First, I'm setting up this function and name it load footer. So a function starts with the word function, and then we need a space, and then we have load footer. And this function can have some arguments with it. So I can tell the function do something, but do it with these values or parameters or whatever I want to send with my call or along with my call. But now we don't need it here, so we enter an empty bracket and start with curly brackets, and that is basically the construction of a function. And if I call this name, then everything what's between these curly brackets is executed. So now we have something we can work with. Let's just enter console.log as the function outputting something in our web developer console here, and I say okay, load footer called. So this should be enough. Often you don't need to add a closing bracket, as it is done automatically in Visual Studio Code. So let's save it, and the browser reloads, but nothing happened because this function isn't called yet. So now let's go to the skin editor and find out where we should place an event calling this function. And usually I concentrate these calls on the element which is doing all the interaction stuff between JavaScript and the skin editor, and I'm using this code element itself. You can add an action everywhere, especially when it comes to system-wide actions like this one. We have some events happening on user interaction as mouse clicks and mouse actions and so on, or player mouse actions and so on. And we have some system-wide events with start, config loaded, image ready. Start is at the very beginning when you fire up a project in the web browser. Then config loaded is the moment when the skin is stable, when everything is known, what nodes are, the connection between nodes and everything else. And then we have images ready when all images for the current viewport are loaded. And the most common place to use functions which are triggered for external JavaScript is you need config loaded. It's the end when the skin is completely loaded and executed, and then we have this event, so you can assume everything is stable now and everything is settled, and now we can have a good base on doing some extra stuff. And the action we need is go to URL, and the call itself is JavaScript. And this short code tells the skin editor not to call an URL like any website or something like that, but everything what's standing here is interpreted as JavaScript code. And now we add just our function call, load, footer, brackets, and a semicolon at the end. Basically, this is a simple JavaScript command line, a call of a function, and you need this prefix here to tell the event to interpret this URL call not as a real URL call for an external website, but for an internal JavaScript call, which the skin is sending out to attached JavaScripts. Now we hit OK, we save, and let's head over to the browser and the code editor. As the browser already has reloaded, we already have a load footer called event. So this function is called by the skin, and usually I make a short note here from where this function is called inside of the skin to keep things on track and know what I am doing and where all these calls are coming from. If you have larger projects, this is mandatory to make some self-documentation inside of your script. So called from code block on config loaded. I usually enter some additional information, especially where it's called and when. So let's save it. And so the first step, to make call from inside the skin editor to an outside JavaScript. The next step we have to do is to look what this function should do. And the first thing is it should load some external file. So first we need to know where this external file is living, and we will store this in a variable. Let's name it footer URL, and this is some string. And now we need to have a look at our output, and we have our footer content. This is a part we assembled earlier in this tutorial, and I will have a short look on it. So we assemble the path to it. I'm hitting the Option key or Alt key on Windows to have the same address, and instead of index.html I'm going to assets. So this is what is exported in our assets folder. And now we have the folder extras, which is named in the Pano2VR HTML output, and inside of this extras folder we have this footer content. If we have a look at the output, then we see it output assets, extras, footer content, HTML, extras, footer underscore content dot HTML. And if I hit enter, I should see exactly what we want to integrate here into our skin. So let's copy it and edit it here. So this is a URL relatively seen from the outputted index HTML in our output folder, and this variable is the base, the source where we get our content from. And now we need a jQuery function which actually loads this file, or let's be more precise, a part of it. And to achieve this, let's have a short look at the documentation of this function. I have bookmarked it here. So this is a load function of jQuery. It's a shorthand code for a larger JavaScript function achieving this, and it saves a lot of time. It's very convenient, and the most simple use case is just this line. You define an element inside of your HTML page, and which has an ID. In this case, the ID is a result, and then attach a load function to this element, and this load function integrates this content of this file into this element. That's exactly what we need here. The more elaborated function is to add a function here. Until here you have the same as above, and after the comma you can add a function which is called if this process was successful, and so we have an alert here. And let's try it. Just copy this part for my personal convenience, and I paste it in here. And now we need to look where is our target, and this is already defined. We only need to have a look at it, and we have our tab container and we have a tab box. And now let's have a look. Under advanced we have the tab box. This is this text box where currently stands as tabs content loading. It's just a placeholder. And below under advanced we have a CSS class attached, and let's copy it. It is a class, so we need to change this to dot as it's a class. The hash stands for an ID, but we have a class here. And now we need to add the first argument, the URL of where the content is living we want to grab here. And let's change this from an alert to console.log, and let's keep it here. And now we should have some result. Let's save it here and head over to the browser, and we have our document, and voila, it is integrated here. And here load was performed. So when the config loaded event is fired in the skin editor, it calls this function, and this function has a URL from the external content, and it is loaded here. And we can be even a little bit more specific, as we have a complete HTML page here, but we don't want it. And so you can be more specific when you define the URL where the content is coming from. And if we have a short view on our footer content, then we see we only want the part from tab box. We don't need this HTML file completely because we are already inside of an HTML file. So this is not needed, and to avoid any issues we exclude this and only take the content of this tab box. I have named it the same, but for clearer understanding I used an ID here. So if I go to custom.css, I have to add here hash tab box. We have no visual difference here, but you see I only grab the content I really need. We can have a short test. I haven't saved it yet, so it is the old version with a complete HTML page. And if I have an inspection here, then you can see inside of the tab box it's adding a complete HTML page with the header and so on. That's not good, so we omit this stuff and only take the content of the tab box, save it, and we have a reload. And now you see no visual difference, but now you see we have really the content section here. And this is exactly what we need to have here. The nav state starting with the nav tabs, and outside there we have the tab box from the skin. So that's exactly how it should work. And we will extend this a little bit in the next step, because we have now just the load function and we have no measures taken about errors or some issues we might have. So this is only working when the function is successful, but we don't have any idea if something goes wrong, where it comes from. That is some addition we need in the next step. To handle errors using this loading process, the load function of jQuery has some nice stuff built in. And let's change our function a little bit. And we have an empty bracket here when the function is called. And this function can have some arguments. And they are prefabricated and have certain meanings and certain jobs to do. And the first one is response. And they have a fixed order, response. And we then have the word status, where we get some diagnostic informations, and then we have the 3 letters XHR. This is a XHTTP request. This is a basic JavaScript function underlying the load function, and this delivers an object with some very useful information if you want to troubleshoot. And now let's have the status outputted, console.log status. Let's see what we get here. I save it before I switch to the console and hit save here. We have an automatic reload, hopefully. And now we get the word success. And that's what we need here. And we can have some more information if we are adding an extra error. Let's falsify the URL, save it, and now we get an error because this file isn't existing, and you get an error here. And so we can here distinguish whether the loading process is successful or not. I don't want to go too much into details. You can make some more explaining console outputs here, but for us it's okay to check whether the status is success or whether the status is error. So now let's make a condition. And is everything okay? And if it's not okay, then let's do something. And if it's okay, let's do the rest what we originally want to achieve here. So if is a condition, and the condition starts with a bracket, and inside of this bracket we say what condition needs to be met. And so we have the word status, and if this is error, then something went wrong. We can make both directions. We can check on status is success. Usually I'm starting with handling the errors and then doing the rest. And then let's say console.log loading. Okay. And if this condition isn't met, then we have an else, and this else now handles the rest if everything is okay, or loading failed, sorry. Thinking is exactly the other way around. And let's just copy it. And so loading, okay. So now we can check it using this return from the loading process, which tells us whether everything is happening here, and here's loading okay. And now starting from here, do our stuff. So this is a pretty simple and robust procedure. You can dive into the functions you get here, especially if the XHR object, it usually tells exactly what's wrong. Is the file existing, or maybe you don't have the right to read it or something like that, and or the file is corrupt or anything like that. But for us it's okay to check if it's an error or not. And after this we can do some stuff with our loaded data we have here. And here everything follows what needs to be stable and part of the whole HTML file we have with index.html here, and which is complete document object we need to handle here. Let's have a short recap of what we have to do now when it comes to wiring all our interactivity here. What is already working is the tab control with this button on top of our content section. This is built in Bootstrap, and this is what we have in our footer content HTML, which is working by these data attributes. We come to this back here very soon. And what we need to achieve now is to build up the interaction in some directions. The first one is if I click on a button, not only the content should change as it is already doing, but also a click on this button should switch to a certain node connected with these 4 names. And you see nothing happens so far. And vice versa. If I change the node here, the tab should change too. When I go to this node, then this button should be highlighted and the content should be invoked. So let's try to make the first part checking when this button is clicked, and then take care about changing the panorama by firing back to the skin editor or to the panorama object of Pano2VR. So let's make some space here, and the first function I need is click on button should switch node, panorama node. So first we need to get an object, and some remark here. What we're doing now is pretty much the same as adding an action to an element in the skin editor. Nothing else I'm doing here. I'm just doing it by code, and in the skin editor you can do it by clicking and choosing elements or parameters and actions and so on. So now let's first find this element. You need to grab an element, you need the jQuery function starting with a $, and then you have a curved bracket, and then you have a dot following with stuff you want to do. And usually this starts when you want to have a click, then you add a so-called event listener. And usually in HTML, only links or form elements or something like that are reacting to mouse events by nature. But with jQuery and JavaScript, you can attach any mouse events to any element. And that's what we are doing here. And so first let's find our element we want to grab here. This button, if I click on this, I need to have a look in our footer content. We have our ID, which is tab box, and then we have this navigation bar. Let's keep this in memory, that's nav. And then we have a list element, and inside of the list element it is a link element, an A tag, and this A tag is what we want to register with a new click. Write it down here and use some quotes here, and dot tab box is our whole element here. We defined it in the skin editor, tab box, and then we leave a space, and then we have a dot nav. This is a navigation bar with the buttons on top here, and inside of this we have the LE, the list element, and then we have the A element. And this element, they are 4, and with one line of code I can add an event listener for a mouse click to all of these 4 elements. So, and after this there we have a bracket, and inside of the bracket we have a function, and then we need 2 other brackets, and then we get some curly brackets, and this is a complete construction we have here. And what it is doing is it attaches a click element, a click event listener. So it forces the HTML structure of our whole page to listen for click and on especially all elements matching these criteria, and then do something. And after this, we have a space for executing something. And the next step is to grab an element of this part here. And first, let's try something. Console, log. There's a universal element in JavaScript, and it is also available in jQuery. And this is a word, this. And it is always a reference to the object itself. So if I click on this button, then this contains exactly the whole object I have clicked on. Let's have a short look and see what this is delivering. So I have reloaded here, and now we should something see. So you see an object, and you see if I unfold it is the complete HTML code of our A tag here. And it delivers this. This is node 2. Let's click here and unfold it, and this should be node 3. And so this vocabulary, this is a self-reference, and inside of this self-reference we now can grab some information we want to have. So now let's get one step further. The information we need to switch the node inside of the panorama object. And this is pretty simple, as we have our object $this, and I just save it here to get a new output and click on this button to have this object and unfold it. So we have this A tag, the link element, and we have some attributes, the classes or the roles, some accessibility rules, and so on. And the two very interesting attributes are data BS toggle. This is a tab function which enables us to control the content below, and the other one is the interesting one. So we have the data BS target attribute, and it shows hash node 2, and originally it's intended to switch the div with the ID node 2, but we can use it here as well. The naming was intentionally, of course, before. If in the footer elements there is a directly semantic connection between the content section and the panorama here, and this ID node 2 is what we need here, and we just want to get this information. So let's go to our custom.js file and enter some empty lines here, and now we want to have get node ID from button. So, and we have some elements, and this element this is very useful in this case. So let's say we name it T node for target node. So, and this is a variable where we want to store this parameter we grabbed from here. And now it's pretty easy. We take this $this as the object we currently have, and this object can have attributes. So we can start with the attribute parameter, but we also can use a reserved function we have. Everything what starts with data dash is in jQuery directly accessible with the data attribute, and then we only need to define which data attribute, and then we enter just the rest of this attribute, and in this case it's BS target without the dash, BS/target, and now we have this word we want to have, and now let's output it. So you see the console is a very handy element to get closer to what we need, and so we can go on step by step to find out what we need here. And now let's check what's happening here. If I click on an element, And so we get node 2. And here we get node 3, node 4, and node 1. So that works pretty nice now. And what we need to have the node ID without the hash. And there we have some convenient function to handle strings. String is a sequence of characters, and hash node 3 or something is nothing else. So let's shorten it and delete the hash in front of the node. And there we can have tnode, same, tnode is equal to tnode, and then we have a function. It is called substring. And substring is a very powerful function, and you can take away characters from the beginning, from the end, a part of it, naming the start and the end of the sequences, or you can define a starting point and then a number of characters you want to have from a string. And the easiest is get the string but leave the first element. The elements are counting from 0, so if I take the string from position 1, I get it from the second one. So let's check it. And if I now click on it, we should have node 3 without the hash in front. And now we only need one little function more, and that's actually switching the node. And this is one line, and you can look at it in the JavaScript API and just searching for next, for example. Pano, here we have already a hit and an example. If I just type in next, and this is the function we need here, Pano open next, and then we have some brackets, and inside we have the node name. And it is a convention inside of Pano2VR that if you are using node IDs, we need curly brackets in front of the node and at the end. So we just copy it, easy as that, and add this here. The Pano is the object defining the whole panorama player with everything else. And if what we need now is we just delete this node here and add some plus signs. These plus signs are not meant mathematically, that are just concatenating operators for strings. And just let's add tnode here. So now this is building up the same as we see here, and it is using the node ID grabbed from the data attribute we have here, and it is depending on which button we click. And now, drum roll, let's check it, whether it's working. And we have the starting point, we have the another, and it is working. The Whitehall and the Chinese room, it evidently worked. So this is one direction from our external content into our panorama, and this is an interaction wiring we are doing with just a few lines of code. And by grabbing elements from this HTML parts here, and especially from a data attribute, and using this to define a node where we want to switch to. After we have now a control chain from the buttons to the panorama, we now need the same other way around. So the panorama object will control the buttons and the content below. So as we have the need for an action called from within the panorama object, we first need to start in the skin. Pretty much the same as we did here, but now let's define a function up front. And this function should have the name, let's say, switch tab. And the switch tab should switch the related content part and the related button when we are entering a new node. So now let's have a function other than with load footer. Let's have a function with an argument, and this argument should be node ID. We want this call already have attached some information from within the skin. We need to provide this information within the skin and send it along with this function to the JavaScript in custom.js. So let's have a curly bracket and let's have a console.log output, and we have, sorry, there needs a dot, not a dash, and we need to have some words to output, switch to, and now we have plus as a concatenator for a string, and let's have a look what this node ID is after this function is called from within the skin. So this does nothing so far, as this function isn't called. It's just defined here. But we need it inside of our skin editor. So let's head over to Pano2VR. And when do we need this information? Currently, we have node hotspots in our panorama project, but let's say we have a menu or we have a map or other ways to switch the node. So it doesn't make sense to attach such an event to a mouse click on a hotspot, but more generally when we change the node, and we have an event for it. So let's attach it to this code block as a second function here, and this function is node change, and after node change I want to have the node ID and send it along with the function to my JavaScript. So go to URL and let's make it a little bit bigger here, and JavaScript : it's always a keyword to not interpret this URL call as intended, but other than that as a JavaScript call to an external available function. So let's have switch tab, and then we need to have the argument, and we now need the node ID we just have entered inside of this bracket at this place. And now let's switch to the documentation and something like Pano get node ID or node ID Pano get hotspot value, and we have get node IDs and so on and so on. And there's some specific function built into the JavaScript API of Pano2VR we need here, and this is the Pano get current node, and it delivers the node ID of the node we are just in. So let's copy it and just insert it here in our function, and this should send the node ID we just entered along with this function to the JavaScript. Let's check it, close it, save it, and now let's head over to the browser and let's see what happens. And we see it works. Here we have switched to node 3. That's what we want to see here. And if I go to Whitehall or to the Chinese room, this comes from the node changed event inside of the skin. So we have the information we need to do the interaction the other way around, not from the content part in the lower section of our project to the panorama, but also vice versa. Now let's switch to the JavaScript code and we can think about what we need to do furthermore to switch the respective parts in the lower part here. We have seen so far that this function works, is called from within the skin. So let's add a short remark here. Invoked by node changed event from skin. And this is what we need as an additional information here, just to know where it comes from. And here we now need to treat our content section here below. Buttons and content section. And now we need to know how can we switch these elements here. For this I will go to the inspector and let's examine the buttons first. This is an active button, this is an inactive button, and right mouse click inspect, and we see we have the list element. It is untouched as it is only for layout and so on. And we have the A tag, which we took to get our target elements here and the data attributes and make it usable. Now we need to find out the difference between an activated button and a deactivated button, and it is pretty easy. You have some classes attached to the A tag, a button dark, the distance in the horizontal, and we have the class active. And let's compare it to the next one. This is Stonehall. It is deactivated and it's button dark mx2, and the difference is the active class. If a button has an active class, it looks like this. If it hasn't, it looks like this. So let's do the same with the text section below. And if we have this div here and just fold it, and you easily can see this one is active and the other ones are grayed out, so they are invisible. And so the active class is also used here. It is generally used in the Bootstrap ecosystem for defining elements being visible or active or receiving mouse events or so on, to distinguish them from elements which are inactive, hidden, or moved away or something like that. And so the active class is a keyword to handle the visibility or the status of elements here. Now the switching between the elements is pretty simple. So let's have some thoughts about how can we manage it. Usually for such element, it's the best way most of the time is not to switch off this single element and then choose the next element to be attached with the active class, but usually is wipe out everything first and then select the element you want to activate. So it is always a two-step process. There are other ways, but this is the most convenient way. And so let's check how to manage this. So first I want to hide all divs. The divs are these content sections here below, these divs, and hide all divs. I just leaving this open here so I have everything at hand. And we have a tab content. This is a class. So let's start with $.tab content. And then inside of it we have a div or several divs. And I simply use a function. It is named remove class. And this class is, as we have found out, active. So sorry, comes at the very end. And so we are removing the class active, whether it's attached or not, doesn't matter. So we have all divs, as we have 4 divs inside of the tab content div. All 4 divs will be losing their active class if they have one. So let's check it out. It should do something. Yes. The first time I click on any button here, all divs are made invisible, so we don't see any of them, and it stays this way. So the next part is do the same with the buttons. Deactivate all buttons. And it is pretty much the same. Let's go to the inspection and have this tab here. We have the buttons are made of the UL. So we have $, opening bracket, and we have, we have the tab box. So tab box. And then we have the LE element, and we have the A element, and some of it, as we found out, has the, it should be the last one, should be attached with active. And so we do the same here. We can just copy it here to deactivate all buttons. So if I reload the project, the first click on any button should deactivate all buttons and hide all divs. So we have a clear status for all. And now let's do the next step where we activate the selected ones. So it is pretty easy to do this. Just let me copy this. So show nodes div, activate, okay, so we deactivate, activate node button. It's only one. So what we need now is to be a little bit more specific. We should check what node should be activate which div, and as the nodes have IDs with our node name, it is pretty easy. So at the div, we just add a hash to take an ID, and then we put the node ID we get from here and adding it to this div, and instead of remove class we use add class, the same other way around. So now we are hiding all and showing one. And the same we can do here with the buttons. Let's have a look how these buttons look like. And we have the LE element, and we have inside an A element with our buttons, and the LE elements have node 3 as a class, so it is pretty much the same. So we have LE dot, and now we add the node as a class, and inside of this we have the A at least, and so copy the node ID, and we have LE dot node ID, and we have div hash node ID to address all the elements we need, and we have the add class here. And if I didn't make a typo or an error, it should work as intended. So now let's test it. I'm changing the room. Yeah, it works. The button is activated and the text is selected, and if I go into the Stone Hall, everything works as intended. Clearing up the elements by removing the active class before is only a fraction of a second, so fast so you cannot see it, as activating the button and the content sections is immediately happening afterwards. Depending on the browser speed, it's milliseconds. So it's a good way to do this. And so we have the other way of interaction from within the panorama to our content section here. And here it is pretty nice to have jQuery at hand, as it is only one line of code to do this stuff we want to do here. As I said in the introduction, we have 3 interaction features in our project. 2 of them are already finished. We have the direction from the text content to the panorama, and from the panorama to the text box with the interaction of switching the content or changing the node when switching the content. The last part is to activate the links we have in the text. Let's have a look at our finished project. And we have some text links here, and these are not really text links, but they are intended for interacting with the panorama and changing the view. Especially when we have some panorama subject like this hall, we can look around, everything is nice, but a user who doesn't know this room has no idea about the fantastic painting on the ceiling of this hall. And if you point the user in the text description to have a look at this, and you can do this interactively, so you can click here and the view is automatically switching to the point of interest you want the user to see. And this is what we want to achieve in the third step of our tutorial, to introduce an interaction from a text link to a view change in the panorama. And you see it's a text box in the upper right corner. It is a little helper I set up for this purpose, makes the work much more easier to do this. And that's the first step we have to do now. And for this, we want to head over to the skin editor and just introduce a simple text field just in the upper right corner. I fix it here, and let's say it's 1010 from the upper right corner, and the text should be center, and I don't make it auto size because I have something in mind here. And let's call this angles box. And this is just a helper. If the project is finished and it's in the so-called production mode, then just make this box invisible. You don't need it only for setup and for development. So let's have it here visible, and we make it invisible when the project is finished. So let's save it. And we have already, as we have set up for live update on save only, it is unchecked, so every edit I'm doing here is reloading the browser. So if I make this box a little bit less height, then you get immediately a reload and the box is already here. So now let's change the text. When I'm heading over to my sample project, you see there's a little frame, and we have a certain way of getting these values, and that's what I like to assemble now. And we go to this text box. I don't need the word text. And I'm introducing an HTML element. If I want text, and the intention is to have this what's showing up here when we have the angles, I want to copy this and paste it into my JavaScript code. So it needs to be of a certain syntax, and I can do this with a text box, but the text box isn't that nice copyable as it is an input field. And now I'm introducing an input field. Input is an HTML element, and I can edit HTML code here, and this input field has some parameters, and one parameter is the value. That's what's to see inside of this field. And let's say it is value for first testing. And if I now head over to the browser, there should be value. You see the border around the field, and this is the native border an input field has to distinguish it from other HTML elements. Let's introduce some style tag. It is like CSS, but it's directly attached to this element. And now let's set the style to width 100%, semicolon. So you see we have the text field of the whole width. And now when it comes to the value, and that's why I'm doing it, it can be selected and you can have copy. That's what is my intention here. And now we want to have inside of this value, deleting it, and inside of this value parameter, I want to have all three angles. I want to have the pan angle, the tilt angle, and the field of view angle. And for this, it's nice to have placeholders in Pano2VR. We have pretty nice selection for it. Let's have a look at it. There's a certain page in the Pano2VR documentation. You see the URL here. And now we have all these placeholders. And what we want to have now is the current pan angle, the current tilt angle, and the current field of view. So pretty easy to memorize. And now let's enter it. And in my code, I need a certain syntax to have it ready to paste in my code, so I can introduce a little bit convenience here. And I'm putting the whole value inside of curly braces. That's what I need later. And I enter the word pan, colon, and now I'm entering position, current pan angle. So we have my placeholders here at hand with a little dollar button. And now I'm introducing a comma. tilt, colon, and position, current tilt angle, and a comma, and FOV for field of view, and a colon, and a placeholder for position, current field of view. After that, I have my closing curly bracket, and now introducing some spaces for better reading. And I save it and head over to the browser, and there we have it. The pan angle, the tilt angle, and the field of view angle. And what's pretty nice now is I just can copy it. And before I do this, let's go to the code editor to the top of everything. And we make some space here because we need to define something here. So I'm introducing an object for viewing angles. So let defines a variable, and this variable should have the name views. I can do freely what I want here, and it is an object. An object in JavaScript is surrounded by curly brackets. I make an empty line here, and this object consists of a chain of elements or a series of elements. You can do there whatever you want. And inside of this object, I'm introducing some new object. And now let's have a closer look at the content to understand what I intend here. I have this data view attribute in my link, and I simply want to use the word painting as my key to have this look here up down to the ceiling. So let's maneuver here. Okay, so, and inside of this object I want to have an element which is named painting. Then comes a colon, and after that you can enter simply a value, or you can enter another object. And I have formatted this whole string with the 3 angles as an object with 3 items. I just copy it and enter it here. After that, we have a comma. And now I have an object views, and inside of this object views, yes, the sub-object is called painting. And later we will call this object and extract these 3 values and send it to the panorama as a viewing angle. We have 2 more in our demo project. In the stone hall, we have the close up to the piano, and in the white hall we have a link to the video screen. I'm lazy here now, and I'm copying the other 2 from my cheat sheet. And you see here's the last comma. You need to delete it to have the code pretty nice. Doesn't matter, but it's good style to delete the last comma. And now we have an object with 3 sub-objects, and all of these 3 sub-objects has also 3 items. And these items always consist of a key and a value. And between there's a colon, and between the items is a comma. That's pretty strict, pretty easy. And that's the way JavaScript handles objects. And this is extremely nice and very slim data transport medium, because you can enter a lot of information with a minimum of coding. So now we have our views object at hand and can use it for our view purposes. Now we have the prerequisites for our interaction between the text links and the panorama, as we have now defined angles where we want to look at if the user clicks on a link. And inside of our footer content, we have the data view attributes as a link. It is painting, it is a piano, and it is a screen. So now let's glue these two parts, the data view attributes of the links and this view object with the predefined viewing directions in the panorama. Now let's glue this together. We have our loading process where the footer content is loaded, and after that we add it in this part. Let's mark it. In this part we have added an event listener for a mouse click to the tabs of this navigation bar to switch a panorama. So we have already the same as we had in the skin editor when attaching an action to a skin element. And let's make some space here and enter a new click on link or on text link moves the Pano view. That's what we have to do now. And the structure is pretty much the same. We need to grab an element inside of our footer content section and add an event listener to it, which reacts to a click and then doing something. So let's start away with this part here. And we need to find out where is the element we want to register a click to. So click, let's make the basic construction up front here, function, and we have an empty bracket, and we have a pair of curly brackets, and here we need to grab our element. And here we do something. This is a basic structure of an event listener definition we are using when we want to get this to work with jQuery. So now let's check what is this link like and where do we find it. We can inspect it in the example project, or we can have a look at the footer content. So we have the upper instance, the wrapper element of everything is tab content. Let's copy it and start away with this tab content. And inside of tab content we have a tab pane just to address the right elements, tab pane, and inside of this tab pane there are links, and these links is what I want to register with. So, and as usual, I do a short check to find out whether I address the right element, and if I receive a message about the click and link clicked, that should be enough. I save it here and we have a reload. Let's close all of this stuff here. And now I should have in the console a click, link clicked. That's what I want to control, of course, as this is valid for all elements in all divs, because we didn't address a specific div of these four. It's valid for all links, and I click here and then I click here, and now I got the click to work. I addressed the right element to catch these clicks, and now I want to get my data attribute, which is attached to this link. As a next step, let's grab this data contained by the data view attribute inside of the link element. And we did already something similar before in the other event listener. So I have a variable, and let's call it target. This can also be got by using this $this data element. Just let's copy it. Let's copy it, and the element we have here is not the Bootstrap element, but our self-defined element view. So we need to enter just view here. And now we get the data view attribute of this link when it's clicked. And so let's check it, whether it's working. consoling. I'm using data, and let's add this value here for a console message to check that we get the right one. Save, and now let's click on it. Link clicked, data is painting. I'm going to the next one, and data is a piano, and the next one, data is a screen. So this is working. Next step. I'm using this in between control steps with the console pretty often to get my stuff done step by step, not too much at once. It is much easier to check errors and to troubleshoot if you're doing it with little steps one after another. That is my experience. It works by far best. So the next one is, we have now this word screen or piano or something like that, and these are the keys of our elements here in the view object we defined on top of the code. So now let's check to get these values. I just add another console.log, just another console message. What I'm doing now is I get this data object. It is already suggested here because the JavaScript functions inside of Visual Studio Code are pretty intelligent, and if you start typing, it's looking around for variables, functions, and makes appropriate suggestions. And inside of the view object, I can address a sub-object just by entering its name inside of square brackets, and the key is target. So let's copy it, and now let's check what's happening now. Now I should get the data object with the 3 angles when I'm clicking on a link. So let's click here, and now I get an object. It's not displayed as a string here like all these white entries in the console, but it's color coded, and you see blue is the key and green is the value, and you can unfold it. It understands the structure of the object, and that's pretty nice, and that's exactly what we want to have here. So now it's the last step we have to do is to prepare these angles, or to extract these angles from the object and to prepare it in a way Pano2VR wants to have it. So now let's get a variable. Let's name it pan for the pan angle. And the pan angle is views target. The target is related to the screen, painting, and so on. And after this, you have a key for the inner item you have. So here, if I want to have pan, I need to write it view target pan. And now I'm getting the pan angle from this data object, from this item. So now you can really do it with copy paste. Let tilde. And now we have our data object. I have it here for demonstration. I left it open. And now here we have tilde. And now we have let FOV. I'm using the same words, but these are variables and these are keys of the object, and they have the same name, but they are completely different. So now let's copy this, copy tilde FOV. And now let's have a little look in the Pano2VR documentation for JavaScript, and we have some functions for this, and I want to move the view, and we have, after scrolling a little bit down, we have Pano move to, and that's exactly what we need here. Pan is a number, tilde is a number, field of view is a number, and we have a speed parameter. Roll and projection we can ignore, but the first 4 we have to obey. And now let's have a value I got from experience. The speed the move has is 10. It is a number, it's related to the imagery drawing frequency of the panorama, and it's a little bit complicated to get this word. It's just trial and error. And now I can use this Pano move to. It's a function inside of the panorama of the Pano object, and function has curved brackets, and inside this you put the arguments, and now you have simply to add these four variables one after another. Pan, comma, tilt, comma, field of view, comma, and speed, comma. So there's some comma missing, and that should do the job. Now let's check it whether it's working. So I have a reload here, and when I'm now going to the stone hall and I'm clicking on the piano link, it's working. If I'm going to the first node, I'm going to the ceiling, and the white hall, we swipe over left to the screen. And now this is working. So now let's have a few commands here. Get item of data object, and here prepare data for Pano2VR call, and send command to Pano object. That's pretty much what we are doing here. And now this interactive part of our project is done. In this last section of our tutorial episode, I want to have some final touches on the project and share some thoughts about Bootstrap as a tool for responsive design. And let's have a look at the current state of our project and compare it with our example project, which is finished. We have another styling in the tab box with the buttons here and a different typography here, and the links are yellow and so on. And now let's have some final touches here. First of all, we don't need angles box here furthermore, so let's just make it invisible and remove it from the screen. I have it here. Don't delete it, because we may need it later for adding other links in other texts and so on. So keep it here, but make it invisible. So I save it here. And now let's have a look at our styling here, and I'm going to the code editor and add some custom stuff. We need to do it by editing our custom CSS file, because about this part, Pano2VR or the skin editor knows nothing. It's just a text box, and what's happening inside of this text box, the skin editor doesn't care. And so we need to do it by ourselves, some fine tuning. I'm just entering a section here, some CSS fine tuning, and here I'm just copy paste some stuff from my cheat sheet and just have some remarks on it. It's nothing special, it is just for making stuff a little bit nicer. So we need to change this robocont. I have some different naming for the roboto font in my template here. It is about the buttons and a little bit about the link. Here's the link color, and if I save it, I should have a save here to have an output. And then I need to reload, because we are now in the CSS file, which has no auto reload function outside. And here we should output it. So let's check it. And now we have our links here. And this works as intended. So, but this is only one aspect. We are just changing a little bit the look Bootstrap provides out of the box. But you can do other things. And another aspect of Bootstrap is being responsive, and some of these features are very useful here, and that we will cover in the next video. Now let's examine a little bit the behavior of our project on different screens. And I'm going to the output we have now and switch to the responsive mode of the web development tools. So you have this little button here in the lower right corner of the development pane, or in the upper right. The pane is on the lower end, but the button is on the upper right corner. And if I switch to it, you can have a pre-selected mobile devices, and you can switch between touch and mouse control. And if I'm changing the screen size, you see first you have 4 buttons in a row. If I'm getting smaller, you have 2 buttons in 2 rows. And this is a nice feature of Bootstrap. And if we go to the footer content, we have already built in this. And the buttons have cal12. That means the thinking is mobile first. Generally, on a mobile device, the button has a column of 12 units, which it's covering 100%. From the small size on, and the small size starts at the mobile phone size about, you have call width of 6 units. So it's 2. We are now here. It's kind of grabbing between the mobile and the tablet. And if we are going even further with the mid-size screen, then we have a column width of 3. That is by 4. We have 12 units total. And this is a 3 units width column. And this is changing subsequently when we are closing down our screen viewport. And this is built in Bootstrap, so it changes the layout depending on the screen width. As I said, Bootstrap is intended to be mobile first, so it has a default, think of a default size with the smallest screen, and then open it up to larger screens with different units. And what we have here is now, when the screen gets closer, the content is disappearing, and I'm now in the touch mode, so when I'm clicking here and moving, nothing happens. Or if I uncheck the touch mode so I can use the mouse wheel, nothing happens. So that's just a simple reason, because everything of this footer content is living in a container in the skin editor, and these containers are by default not equipped with a scroll bar or some behavior related to scrolling or so on. But we can change this. There's a CSS property named overflow, and this is also covered inside of the Bootstrap ecosystem. So we just can head over to Pano2VR, grab our text container, and we have a class already here just for our structure. And I can add a class of Bootstrap, and this is overflow, flow-auto. The overflow is just a CSS property which is named overflow, and then you have several parameters or several values it can have, and auto is one of them, and the class is prefabricated in Bootstrap, and it's just named overflow auto. And I save it here, and now I check what's happening. So now when I'm testing it here, nothing happens, so we need to have an output here. So now I can scroll this whole part with the scroll wheel. If I activate the touch mode, then you can click and move it around here. This property is provided by Bootstrap, and you can, of course, that's why I demonstrated it here, you can, of course, use Bootstrap classes inside of the skin editor. That's a great feature. And Bootstrap is very universal, and they are pretty nice coexisting, Bootstrap and Pano2VR. So now we have this scrolling added to our content here and have it available at all screen sizes, and also with touch events like swiping up and down here. Now let me use a last finishing step for our project to introduce the structure we have in CSS to have different properties of CSS depending on the screen size. That's what one of the main features of Bootstrap. It is based on the so-called media queries. And these media queries are sensitive to screen width or screen height or screen ratio or some other technical environment parameters and can change the CSS rules conditionally, and that's what we want to have here. Now it looks pretty nice what we have here, and if we have some larger screen size for the browser, then we have this font size for the tab, and if I make it a little bit smaller, let's have it here in our responsive view. So maybe it should be a little bit larger when the screen is pretty wide. If I'm going smaller with the screen, it is pretty okay. The most important thing, if you have such structures as buttons and so on, you need to take care of how long the words are, and such a button bar, there shouldn't be any word breaks or something like that. Then now let's introduce such a media query for the font size of this navigation bar. Turn it off here. Such a media query is starting with an @ sign, @ media, and then we have a round bracket, and then we have a curvy bracket, and inside of this curvy bracket we can introduce rules as we did before, and inside of this round bracket we have the condition. We want to have this rule to kick in. So the condition here is now I want to have a maximum width, and this is called max width, and then we have a colon, and then we have a value. 992 pixels is a so-called breakpoint we have inside of the Bootstrap system, and if we are introducing our own media queries and our own conditions when some CSS rules are changing, we should keep it along the switching which happens inside of the Bootstrap engine. And you can have a look at the Bootstrap documentation and just check for breakpoints. Breakpoint, available breakpoints, and then you get the numbers. And 992 is the threshold between medium and large. So that's for this. Inside of this conditional part, we can have, and I just copy it here, to have an own rule. I just paste it in here. So I want to change the font size of the link buttons inside of our navigation bar, and I want to change this to 14. And in case that it is defined directly in the element, or I'm not specific enough here to address these elements, I just add this important addition at the end of the rule, and then it overrules everything what I've defined before, respectively what I've defined directly at the element. And so I'm saving it here, going to Pano2VR, and I'm hitting the generate button, and now I need to reopen my browser. And now you see the button typography is way smaller, and if I'm making it smaller, you can even use longer words now, and you see now it changes. Let's enter the developer mode with F12 and go to the responsive mode, and I'm making a larger screen. Then you see here the screen size is visible here, and at 992 the font size gets smaller. This is one example to use such media queries to adapt elements to various screen sizes. Just one simple example to get this shown here. So now we are finished with our project, and it covered a pretty nice collaboration between Pano2VR, especially the skin editor, and an external JavaScript-based ecosystem or CSS-based ecosystem like Bootstrap and jQuery. And you can imagine that you can do a lot of stuff with it, and to extend Pano2VR with pretty new features what are not available out of the box inside of the skin editor. Of course, you can do all this in the skin editor, but it's a lot of work, and you need to do a lot of manually, and one external file covering all these structure here is way easier to edit than to dive into an endless tree structure in the skin editor. So it has an advantage to do some stuff which is pretty complicated on the first glance, but has a lot of advantages to keep things more compact and easier to understand if I'm doing it in a very large structure in the skin editor. So this simple box, this simple container with a simple text box is the container for doing some extended stuff inside of the Pano2VR skin editor.